Hello and welcome to our webinar. Our title today is Use and Abuse of Digital Media, Adopting a Developmental Perspective in Understanding Technological Addictions. Our expert panel members are Professor Griffiths and Professor Motti Stefanidi. This webinar is brought to you by Victoria University Institute for Health and Sport and hosted by our Cyber Psychology Research Group. An overview of what we can expect in the webinar today. We will have an introduction to our panelists by our PhD candidates, Kasim Latifi and Dion Tolet-Prado, followed by an overview of the topic area by Dr. Vasilios Stavropoulos. We'll then move to our expert panel discussion, and the facilitators will be Kasim and Dion. And they will consider opportunities and risks related to the use of digital media for developing individuals, problematic digital media use, prevention and intervention initiatives, and future directions, research priorities, and policies required or recommended to address potential harms from the abuse of digital media. We'll then take questions from the audience and finish with closing by Dr. Vasilios. So welcome to the webinar, and we hope you enjoy your time with us.
Greetings, my fellow colleagues and esteemed panelists and other participants. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us in this seminar today, and I hope that it is very beneficial for you. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce one of our esteemed panelists, Professor Mark Griffiths. Professor Griffiths is a chartered psychologist and professor of gambling studies at Nottingham Trent University. He's also the director of the International Gaming Research Unit. He is internationally known for his work into gambling and gaming addictions, and he has won many awards. One of his most recent awards is the 2009 Research Award from the US National Council on Problematic Gaming. His area of expertise are addictions in relation to gambling, video game, internet, exercise, and sex addictions. His current research projects include questionnaire and interview studies into online gaming addictions, behavioral tracking projects examining online gambling and the utility of social responsibility tools, national prevalence surveys on various addictive behaviors, including gambling, exercise, and video game playing, and online studies of various aspects of video game playing behavior, such as game transferring phenomena, online trolling, etc., etc. Professor Griffiths has had over 1,000 publications, including research papers and books. He has served on numerous national and international communities, such as Society for the Study of Gambling, Gamblers Anonymous General Services Board, and National Council on Gambling. He is a former national chair of GamCare. He also does a lot of freelance journalism and has appeared on over 2,000 radio and television programs since 1988. In 2004, he was awarded the Joseph Lister Prize for Social Sciences by the British Association for the Advancement of Science for being one of the UK's outstanding scientific communicators. His awards also include the 2006 Excellence in the Teaching of Psychology Award by the British Psychological Society and the British Psychological Society Fellowship Award for exceptional contributions to psychology. We are honored to welcome Professor Griffiths to the seminar. I will now pass it on to my colleague, Dion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kasim. Thank you. And now it is my own great pleasure to introduce our second panelist, Dr. Froster Motti. Now, so take a moment to share. Beautiful. Froster is a longtime professor at the University of Athens, as well as a visiting global fellow at the Graduate School of Education in Harvard. She is a member of the Secretariat of International Consortium of Developmental Science Societies and of the Governing Council of the Society for Research and Child Development. Having worked out of the University of Athens, Froster has had a long career promoting developmental psychology through both a lengthy commitment to research spanning 46 studies and 13 years, as well as 40 years of teaching developmental psychology, speaking roles across Europe, and a commitment to directly improving youth development through membership on a wide variety of committees going back 30 years, even involving the founding of the Hellenic Psychological Society. She's made great contribution to Victoria University as well for her research and her prior leadership roles. Her primary research focus at the moment is youth adaptation, the development and acculturation of youth, as well as more generally on the development of resilience. However, more recently, she's also been involved in work with my supervisor, Vasilios, on internet and gaming addictions in youth. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Froster Motti, and it really is an honor to have you. I now pass to Vasilios, who will give an introduction to the topic.
Thank you, Dion. Thank you, Kasim. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Froster and Mark, for being here, and thank you to the audience for attending this webinar and making the time. And thank you to Victoria University events team for organizing us. I'm going to briefly introduce the topic of this webinar. So we are in 2021, and around 50 years ago, a massive transition from mechanical and analogic communication to digital media occurred, making many to argue that the digital revolution, also known as the third industrial revolution, initiated. Around 20 years ago, the growth of such technologies accelerated, defining this time as the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution, also known as the digital era or the second coming. And at that point, the term digital natives emerged to describe those who have become familiar with new technologies early in life and distinguish them from digital immigrants who were exposed to digital means in adulthood. My apologies, my PowerPoint stopped. So it is again the screen. So it is the use and abuse of digital media by digital natives and immigrants, which is the interest of this webinar. Digital media involve instrumental, socialization, and entertainment aspects. Instrumental aspects refer to uses necessary for one's life. For instance, the digital education market records 9.1 annual growth, and it's expected to exceed $300 billion in value by 2026. Socialization aspects of digital media usage involve what is most commonly known as social media. They serve the distribution of information, opinions, interests, ideas, and expressions across online communities and networks. They occupy a range of areas, including employment, example, LinkedIn, research, ResearchGate, romance, Tinder, friendships, Facebook, and even political activation, Twitter and Reddit. Social media recorded over 3.5 billion users at the start of 2019, a 45% global penetration, and 98% in more developed countries like the US. Entertainment aspects of digital media may involve digital games, gambling, audiovisual recordings, and access to sexual material. Radical developments occur across all these types. Indicatively, internet or digital games may be enhanced by naturalistic animations and augmented reality features where the online and the offline world are mixed. For instance, searching virtual objects in real life locations, such as in the game Pokemon Go. Great variability occurs. Some games are played versus environment, player versus environment games, PvE. Others allow multiple players to concurrently compete. multiple multiplayer online games, or player versus player games, PvP. Other games require the development and customization of an in-game role, persona, role-playing games, RPGs. The latter might be combined with a multiplayer feature, resulting to what we call massively multiplayer role-playing games. A common game component is the progressively increasing challenges and rewards that keep one engaged. Nevertheless, games may have different themes, such as real-life simulation, adventure, and racing. And more diverse applications continue emerging. For instance, the gamified application Strava uses geocoded data to track one's cycling and running in real life on a multi-user platform while allowing for concurrent information sharing. The application allocates trophies to reward performance, motivating real-life exercise. And more hybrid applications have started making their appearance. We now have what we call the massively multiplayer online virtual reality social platforms, where we have social media mixing with gaming. Example, for those less familiar, the virtual reality chat, where people interact via avatars in a virtual world without having any kind of game-related challenges to address. Digital gamers currently exceed 2.7 billion people, with the market increasing by over 9% annually. And similar rates of increase are recorded across other entertainment-related digital media, such as virtual pornography, where we have increases in the market exceeding 15% annually. Differences also occur considering the outcome of one's digital media usage across the spectrum from minimum to maximum. So we have those who abstain, the moderate users, and those who use digital media excessively. Those who abstain, because they're either lacking skills or access, appear to suffer from lower employability, income, and time resources. Moderate users who may use digital media for their real-life needs appear to benefit across their education and employment, while excessive users' well-being is compromised. The question that we hope to address with the help of Mark and Froster tonight is how can we maintain the benefits and reduce the risks related to the use and the abuse of digital media? Once again, thank you for joining us tonight, and we truly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay. Are Professor Griffiths and Professor Motti here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you so much for attending, and welcome once again to both of you, our esteemed panelists. Our first question will go to Professor Griffiths, and the question is, what is the impact of digital media use on mental health? Is it altogether positive or negative, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, I think you've answered your own question there. It's quite clearly more complicated than a kind of good or bad question. I mean, I get questions from the media every single week, and typical questions are video games good or bad? And my kind of stock answer to that, well, which particular games are you talking about? Because it's quite clear that, you can't necessarily compare, playing Snake on a smartphone with playing something like World of Warcraft in a kind of role-playing environment versus Tetris. I mean, these are all very, very different genres. And when we talk about digital gaming, there are so many different types of genres and games out there. My own perspective, and it's always, it always amazes me. I mean, I've spent the last 34 years studying, problematic technology use. And I think a lot of people perceive that if you're working in the area of problematic technology use, you must be in some way anti these technologies, which of course couldn't be further from the truth. For me, almost all the technologies we've got, the advantages always outweigh the disadvantages. And, when we talk about the disadvantages, we're always talking about a very small minority of individuals. And I think whether it's internet use, whether it's gaming, whether it's online gambling, whether it's online shopping, I mean, whatever you do online, most people are engaged in these activities because it makes them feel good. And when you relate that to mental health, it's quite clear from my perspective is that most people engage, continuously engage in activities because it's actually bringing something positive to their lives. And when we talk about the downside of kind of digital technology use, it's always this very small minority, which does, to me, based on my research and other people's research, it's usually to do with very excessive use. But I also would make the point that very excessive use in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, again, another question the media always ask me, you know, because I always talk about what I call healthy excessive enthusiasms. And in, you know, and I would actually include work in that. You know, I'm somebody that absolutely loves my work and probably work too much. And we know that, you know, work in its most excessive forms can be a form of addiction in the same way that, you know, digital technology can be as well. So the question I always get asked is, you know, what's the difference, if you like, between a healthy enthusiastic activity and an addiction? And for me, it's very easy. You know, healthy excessive enthusiasms add to life and addictions take away from it. You know, and when we apply that to mental health, for the vast majority of people that engage in digital technology use, it's going to be something that is positive and advantageous in their life. And obviously, you know, I'm obviously interested in this, you know, what I would consider a very small minority that get into trouble and difficulty, whether it's their social media use, whether it's their gaming, whether it's online gambling. You know, and I've spent the last 34 years studying so many different types of addictive behavior, but I'm not anti these things in any way, shape or form. You know, even things like gambling or alcohol use, which, you know, are kind of other areas that I've looked at. I mean, there is no evidence that moderate use of any of these types of activities, even if you've got a moral standpoint against these activities, there's no evidence that moderate use of these activities has any, you know, any negative impacts in people's lives. And that's, you know, obviously is equally true to things like social media use and gaming use. So for me, it's never about, are these good or bad? We have to say, when we're talking about good or bad, which particular types of technology or which particular games are you talking about? And even when we drill down to those particular genres or subgenres that we look at, is for me, is that, you know, as I say, the positives so far outweigh the negatives. But of course, you know, I know this from, you know, the history of working in the media. If something you do, I just know when I've written lots about the therapeutic benefits of playing video games, for instance. But when you publish a paper, that doesn't make the newspapers or the TV or the radio. When you publish a study saying, you know, 4% identified as, you know, having problematic social media use, you can guarantee that that is going to get headlines, as opposed to the, you know, the many studies that have looked at the positive benefits of these interactive technologies.
Thank you so much for your enlightening answer, Professor Griffiths. Professor Motti, is there anything you can add to that? Perhaps from a developmental perspective.
Yes, hello, and thank you for the warm words in the introduction. I would like to add a few things, a few thoughts. I think that I agree that on the one hand, we don't want kids to, or young people, and especially I'll focus on young people, I'm a developmental scientist, we don't want them to abstain because this has negative consequences in their lives currently and in the future, that's clear. We don't want excessive users in general, and I will say a few words about why. Their lives are compromised, and I will talk more about that. We want, as Professor Griffith said, moderate users, although he didn't think that excessive users necessarily have a very bad outcome from what I understood what he said. I think that, and we wrote a paper, Dr. Stavropoulos, Dr. Griffiths, myself, on this issue, we need to consider the full range of functioning and digital use, right? So you can start with people who really don't know, don't have access, for some reason they don't really use it, and that is a problem nowadays. You can go to the other extreme, and we're talking about a 4.6% of excessive users, and this is a big issue. In my view, it is not that benign. It's a clinical problem, and I will explain why as we talk. I think the next question has to do with the problematic use. But then there's a whole range in between. And we have a high-risk group, which is not exactly clinical, but it's using more than they should. Why more than they should? That we have to take in developmental context. And what do I mean by that? Young people have to do a number of things to develop into healthy, normal, well-adapted adults, right? So there are developmental stages they go through. They need to address developmental tasks, including having friends, doing well enough in school. I'm not saying being the most popular or the best student in school, but doing well enough in school. having positive conduct. You know, there are a number of developmental tasks which differ from stage to stage in life, developmental stages, right? So the use of the digital media needs to allow time and be provided, and the opportunity to use them will be done in such a way that there will be a balance, and the young people can develop their offline behavior and relationships and knowledge and what have you with the offline, right? So you don't want young people who don't have real life friends, whose use of the digital media actually is an obstacle for their academic achievement, right? Etc. And also, I'm not sure about internalizing problems. This is a big issue too, you know, what has actually, why use the media? Why be stuck in your bedroom, closed there, and use all the time digital media instead of doing things that you're supposed to be doing as a young person, in addition to the digital media? Could depression be part of the story? So in any case, to wrap it up, of course, there are positive points and sides to using the media, the digital media. It's clear that they can be used, as Professor Stavropoulos and Professor Griffith said, to connect with friends. I'm putting it in my own words. You have easier access to information, news, entertainment. All of these things are true. At the same time, excessive use, and that is something to be defined. What exactly is moderate and what is excessive? And there may be differences in opinion about that, right? This can be detrimental for one's current development and long-term development. And one step further for their mental health, right? Because if you are alone, you don't have real life friends, and you don't do well in school, and therefore you diminish your opportunities for employment later on, etc., you don't accomplish these developmental tasks, this will lead to mental health issues like possibly depression, conduct problems, etc.
Yeah. Just to add a little bit of rejoinder to everything you're saying, hearing interesting things from both sides about the, and this makes me think about a recent article I read, something that both of you actually contributed to. It's responding right now to a certain situation in China. And it describes gaming as having a normative role in development over the lifespan. I'd just like to ask, and maybe we can go to Mark first and then Froster again, what is this normative role that we're referring to, and how does it compare to those other normative developmental behaviors that Froster just described, considering that gaming is a relatively recent development, popularized in the 90s and the O's with home consoles and multiplayer gaming, where when development, a lot of the behaviors that Mavis is replacing have been around for thousands of years. Go to you first, Griffiths.
Yeah, thanks, Dion. I mean, obviously I'm a researcher, but I'm also a father of 3 screenagers. I've now got 3 children who have just reached early adulthood now. And I know that Frosso and I will agree to disagree on some things. I mean, I've watched all of my children are the archetypal digital natives that they've never known a world without a smartphone, without interactive television, without social media. I mean, they've just grown up their whole lives with this. So when we talk about normative behaviors, I mean, I do have to say that I get lots of emails. Well, I say lots of emails. I certainly get emails every week from parents who I think pathologize children's behavior. And I know this is what, and I know I've talked to Frosso about this before, and I know that we've probably got a different emphasis on this. My attitude as a parent, and I'd like to think I was a responsible parent bringing up my children. My attitude was, and I totally agree with Frosso here, is that when we talk about children's normative development, is that yes, they have to engage with their peers. Yes, they should be engaged in educational activities. Yes, they should be engaged in physical activities. And also, in terms of how I brought up my kids, is that they should be doing things around the house and interacting with the family and doing their chores and everything. It's what I call this kind of balanced educational and healthy diet to bring up children properly. Now, as I say, I get emails every week from parents who they write to me and say, "Dear Dr. Griffiths, my child is addicted." It's usually my daughter is addicted to social media, or my son is addicted to video games. And when I say, why do you say that? The same answer that comes back all the time is because they spend 3 or 4 hours a day doing these activities. And I write back and I say, this is where Froster might disagree with me. I write back and I say, well, we psychologists have got a word for that. It's called normal, because this is what children do today. They do spend 3 or 4 hours a day in front of screen-based technologies. Now, I ask myself, what did I do when I was my children's age? And I tell you what I used to do. I used to watch 3 or 4 hours of television a day. You know, every night I would sit down, and when I was young, there was only 3 channels to watch. It was actually black and white television. That's showing my age here. You know, the thing is now, none of my children particularly watched TV while they grew up. They were, you know, far more likely to be on social media or playing games. I remember when my youngest son was 9 years old, every night after he'd finished his homework, he'd meet up in something called Club Penguin, which was a game and an environment where he met his other friends at kind of 7:30 till 8:30 and talked and interacted. And again, for me, I think a lot of people pathologize interaction when it's online and somehow say that actually being face-to-face in person is somehow better than interacting online. Now, I'd like to say, you know, here we are in this webinar now, we're interacting online. I don't think that the social communication we're having now is any lesser of import, or, you know, is somehow degraded by the fact that we're not all in the same room face to face. And this is what young people do all the time. Now, I'm not, can I just say for the record, I don't believe that you should be in a world where you only interact online. And of course, the last year and a half, COVID has basically brought us into this situation where we actually now are and have been living our lives online. You know, I saw my in-laws for the first time in 2 years last weekend. I mean, I would say that it has been very hard, and I think it's been hard on people's mental health because we've all had to live our lives online for the past year and a half. So I totally agree with Frosso when she says we have to think about the mental health impact if you live your life online all the time. But I would also say is that the younger generation today, and here I'm talking about basically anyone that's basically under 25 at the moment, is that, you know, this kind of thing that we're doing now in this webinar and how we've lived over the last year and a half, it's probably affected more, you know, people more like me who have basically spent their, I was actually about 25 before I'd ever used a computer. I mean, that's how antiquated I am in this world. But, you know, when we talk about normative development, we just have to realize is that screen-based technologies, whether it's social media, whether it's gaming, whether it's shopping online, whether it's access to sex online or whatever, this has just become normalized, and it's a normative part of people's development. And I would say that I'm in that category of parent. You know, when I grew up, you know, my attitude was when my children came home from school, once they'd done their homework and they'd done their chores around the house, what they then did with their available leisure time, I was fairly relaxed about. You know, my youngest son was, and he still is actually, he's 20 years old now, but an avid video game player and spends a lot of his time playing games. Even though he's now at university, I know that that's, you know, what he loves doing. But, you know, my attitude is that, you know, as long as gaming or social media or just technology use in general doesn't interfere with education, physical education, and that peer interaction, then I've actually got no problem in my children doing that for 3 or 4 hours a day. But I know there's a lot of parents out there, basically because they don't do those activities themselves. I mean, parents tend to pathologize things that they don't do themselves. Now, obviously, I was actually, you know, I was one of those people when I was 14 playing Donkey Kong on my dad's Commodore 64, you know, when I was growing up. I mean, I used to spend hours doing that. Okay. And again, I don't think it really harmed me in terms of my later life. And maybe that's why, as a parent, I was more relaxed about my kids, you know, playing games, including my daughter, who also was a big games player as well. And it's not that I promoted this, but it is just part and parcel of normative development for me.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'm just, I can see that Froster is champing at the bit a little bit there to
Absolutely.
respond. I'm just going to pass it on to her. Dr. Froster, what normative role can digital media have on development, and how does that role compare with other activities that could be engaged with at that time?
What was the first question? What kind
of normative role can digital media play in development, and how does that digital media role compare with other activities that could be engaged in.
Right. May I respond to what
Oh,
Mark
yeah,
said?
absolutely. That's
Yeah,
what I was
please do,
looking for
Froster.
you
We
later.
agree on many parts, more than we disagree. I would take out the word pathologize about the use of media, of digital media, because the pathologic part is really this 4.6%, that kind of use. For the rest, it's within the range of the normal, right? Although it's getting a bit tight towards the upper side, but still I would not use the word pathologize. We shouldn't pathologize. I think that cultural context may play a role in all this, Mark, because I also raised two children. Now they're adults, older than yours. And at the time it was Game Boy, really, that they were playing with. Well, the whole idea is to, when you come back from school, from the public school, about 2:30, let's say, and you end lunch, etc., 3:30, and then you have other things happening which have to do with sports, with a second language or third language, whatever, or whatever else. They have to go to different things, extracurricular, which don't happen in the school program or in the school system. And you have to sleep around 9 or let's say even 10. There aren't that, and you have homework, lots of homework in Greece, right? So there aren't that many hours left, right? So if you take 4 hours out of this chunk of time before they go to sleep, it's basically dominating the whole time after school. So I don't know, I would definitely not pathologize, because I don't think that just the use of the digital media and how much you use them, or even the type of digital media that you use by itself will lead to pathologic behavior, problematic behavior, or to mental health problems one step further. What I do think is that there are other things that the person brings along with them in terms of experiences, in terms of how they have come to be who they are today, their personal characteristics, their baggage, their psychological baggage that they bring along related to their previous experiences. All of these interacts and contributes to to whether you will be a moderate user, or actually no, or what the effects will be of your use of the media, of the digital media on your behavior and adaptation and mental health. So this is one thing. I think that digital media do play a role, it's clear. And I think that Mark mentioned that, he was pretty clear, and he basically responded to your question, and I agree with that. It's part of young people's lives. It's beyond what my generation, or Mark's, who is a bit younger than me, I think, quite younger, I don't know, but younger, understand. With it's they socialize this way. It's no question about those things. Even we have come to this point, especially during the COVID era. It's what I am saying is that even though this is a means that is important, a medium that is important for many functions and domains of life, still we have to allow space for real life to occur. And for that, I have 2 points to add here. You need parental monitoring and actually organizing the child's life in such a way so as to provide this balance that is needed for healthy development. And also, what is normative and what is normative, what is normal? Let's put it that way. It's a bad word, but it says what I mean here. What is good enough? What doesn't hurt, right? In terms of media usage, of digital media usage, will be defined and there have been attempts like that through studies, through longitudinal studies of young people, where you have to try to figure out the early antecedents of later behavior in terms of digital use, and then consequences of X amount of different amounts and different types of digital use in the future. You need longitudinal studies, and this is something we can take up more in the last part of this discussion.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for that, both of you. We're going to have to go to the next topic now, just because we have to get through the time. The next topic is social media use and abuse prevention and intervention in cases where it does get problematic. And I'm going to direct this first to you, Mark. It seems from what you've both been saying that this revolution in technology and culture brought about by digital media, there's been a lot of benefits, but there can be some drawbacks to a small minority of people. I think you said 5 to 6%. Now, I know that a lot of people, communities, states, parents are concerned with these technologies and any addictions they might have. What can be done, both by professionals like clinicians or by organizations or by individuals like concerned parents, to manage the effects of an addiction in such a case that it does breach that threshold or is problematic?
Well, obviously that's a really huge question, and you can obviously address this on, and I have to be honest, I'm going to almost use kind of cliches and stereotypes here in my answer, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. If you think, whether we talk about drug, when I was growing up in school, which is obviously a long time ago now, is that, we had drug education in class. People talked about the dangers of cigarette smoking and what have you. Now, and I do a lot of outreach work into schools, I go into schools and they get me to talk about gambling, social media use and gaming, because these are three areas that, have been, a kind of on parents' radars or on teachers' radars. So in terms of kind of intervention and prevention, obviously youth education is, prevention is better than cure. And I'm a passionate believer in youth education and informing people from as an early age that they can understand these things, to talk about, the potential dangers of things. I think parents, this is a group that, is always said that parents need education on things. And I think parents, that in terms of things like, unwanted pregnancies in teenage years and smoking and drugs, these are things that parents kind of do know about. But the things about, things like gaming and social media and gambling, these are things that parents are less likely to know about. So we do need kind of educational programs for parents. And I know schools, the outreach work that I do in schools, they actually, bring parents together in the evenings and talk about, teachers will talk about the issues that are affecting them. I mean, one of the ones I can think of is that the thing that, for teachers, one of the scourges for teachers is children using smartphones in classes. And of course, we have lots of schools here that have banned smartphones, being used in class, but it's actually very hard to stop children surreptitiously under the table accessing the social media and stuff. So it's quite obvious that parents and teachers know about certain issues from, the kids that they interact with both at home and in the educational environment. So on a kind of education level, parents need to be educated, children need to be educated, but also from the professional side. So again, in terms of, going to a GP now, a GP will regularly screen people for their smoking use, illicit drug use. Sometimes, gambling has kind of crept in there, but things like gaming and social media use, which do affect mental health for a small minority, that's the kind of thing that, GPs wouldn't necessarily be educated about or know a lot about, because they're rooted in things that are very much more medical, because that's what they did when they came through medical school. So I mean, the first plank of my question there, sorry, the first answer to your question there is really about education and awareness. And it's education awareness amongst all those stakeholder groups, whether, as I say, whether it's the children, whether it's the parents, whether it's teachers, whether it's, people who are healthcare professionals. The next thing is it's, in terms of, what we're really talking about is prevention of overuse and being, overindulging in things, because, from my perspective, there are a lot of what I would call habitual gamers, habitual social media users who would nowhere near reach any clinical definition of addiction. And this is where I agree with Froster, where it does actually impinge and have, if you like, it affects productivity in people's lives, whether that's your education or occupation. I mean, if somebody, if one of my colleagues at work is spending 3 hours a day on social media, yeah, they may not be addicted, but it's going to be interfering with, their teaching preparation or what they should have been doing in their jobs, or not paying attention in meetings or whatever. So, one of the things I've been doing with gambling operators, which I think can actually now be rolled out and applied to both social media operators and video game operators, is actually to give people tools that they can actually start to moderate their use. So in gambling, for instance, now when you go on a typical online gambling site, you can set your time limit, your money limit. You can self-exclude yourself for certain, small periods of time, whether that's 24 hours or a week. These kinds of things could be quite easily enacted by social media operators and by the video gaming industry. And in fact, social media operators, whether it's Facebook, whether it's, the hardware producers, Apple and Android, for instance, they are now starting to do things like, for instance, instead of having a notification or a little beep, every time a message comes in, you can roll those in so you only get those beeps, once every hour. So you're not attenuating to what is coming up all the time. So I do think, in terms of prevention of overuse, is that we can start to, particularly where technology is concerned, we can actually use technological intervention and innovation to actually help people moderate their use so that it's not necessarily interfering with their lives all the time. Because, I see it all the time with smartphones. It's, the vast, people talk about addiction to smartphones. And can I just say for the record, my attitude is that people are no more addicted to smartphones than alcoholics are addicted to bottles, because really what we're talking about is the applications on the smartphones rather than the smartphones itself. But of course, there are lots and lots of different applications that people love doing on their smartphones. And for me, it's about obviously educating people about why spending hours and hours and hours on this is probably not a good thing to be doing. And so you should be doing these things in moderation. But also, there is a responsibility there on the providers of these technologies to actually provide those tools to help people moderate their use in the first place. And then, of course, when we get to the kind of hard end of the spectrum, when we talk about treatment, is that, when it comes to things like, so, people, and can I just say for the record, I think the number of people who are genuinely addicted to social media or games in the same way that people are addicted to, say, alcohol and drugs is a very small number. But in fact, trying to get treatment for those things is a very hard thing to do. I know here in the UK is that, gambling is something that now, there are over 200 Gamblers Anonymous groups up and down the country. We have a national gambling telephone helpline. But, gamers, video gamers are now ringing the gambling telephone helpline because there's nowhere, no national organization where they can go to get help for, trying to curb and solve, whether it's problematic gaming or gaming addiction, whatever we want to call it, is that, if people aren't aware of the services, where can you get treatment for this? I know, and I've done this. I mean, I've used freedom of information requests from our health services to find out whether people are turning up to get treatment for gaming addiction and social media addiction. Yeah, it doesn't happen much, but it does happen, and those services are not there. Things like gambling, which is obviously, I think, one of the most established behavioral addictions, that has started to happen in many, many westernized countries all around the world, but we're not necessarily seeing that for gaming and social media use, apart from maybe in Southeast Asia, where they are, I do think, you mentioned China before, they've started their policy initiatives, which I think are very draconian. And then, it's something that I wouldn't want to see happen elsewhere, is that, they have pathologized gaming and basically are saying, almost any gaming is bad, which I don't, it's not a perspective that I come from. But, when we talk about, kind of the policy things, is that, policymakers, government officials, members of parliament, etc., these are issues that come up and they should be involved in them. And of course, as a researcher, I would always say we need money for research, but we do need also money for that awareness education and also money for the kind of treatment and prevention aspect as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Mark. I'm just going to pass it over to you, Froster. What can be done by organizations, by concerned parents, by individuals, and so on, to perhaps deal with those more problematic cases of digital media use?
So I agree on many things with Mark, but I will respectfully differentiate my what I will say now, differentiate myself a bit. Let's take prevention. So prevention, if we agree that they are, and basically we must agree because we wrote a paper together on that with Mark and Vasilis, that there are some push factors, right, that promote different types of digital usage behaviors. And so you would have personality characteristics, you have a number of individual level characteristics that we have described in the paper. But at the same time, I want to go back to the lived experiences of people, what they bring along. For example, educational failures, for example, inability, not a lack of social skills to actually communicate with peers, right? Those are two examples. Difficulties to communicate within the family. So those are possible hypotheses, right, as antecedents. You may want preventatively to actually not just educate people about the media, this type of media usage, etc., and their effects, etc., but you may want to actually promote positive youth development so that they don't need to come to the point to have to use the media in order to compensate for all the things that they're lacking in real life. So, so it's more psychological and less educational, what I'm saying, right? In terms of treatment, if we assume and if we agree that digital abuse, internet abuse is expressed, it's a type of addiction and or impulse control problem, right? I think that by just educating people, you are just taking out these symptoms, which may all at once reappear in some other type of addictive behavior. It could be gambling, it could be alcohol, it could be, I don't know, name it. I think that the roots are deeper. It's not just not knowing how to, it's not simply not knowing how to use these means appropriately in time-wise, for example, so that you can balance the rest of your life. You can simply not do that. It's like saying to an alcoholic, stop alcohol. Well, they cannot do that. It's not that simple. And even if you educate them of how bad this is for them, it won't happen like this. So I think that it's really in the realm of clinical psychology, trying to figure out the root of this problem. Why do they have to actually use the media so intensely? We're talking about the pathological side, right? And the prevention has to do a lot with prevention, meaning at the psychological level, promoting what I said before, positive youth development, offering the opportunities for real life experiences, and at the same time monitoring the use of such media by the parents. Now, about this Chinese letter that we wrote and the Chinese decision, that the law, so we had this discussion as we were writing this letter. I was giving an example to my colleagues and co-authors in this letter about Greece. So when I was raising my two boys, it was a time when we have very good laws in Greece. They're just not implemented very well. And so young people, 12, 13, 14, 15, go to bars and get drinks, alcoholic drinks. And it relies on the parents to monitor that and control that, which not always easy, because there's a trend of young people doing that. Where do you put the balance? Where do you put the line? Where do you set this line? And how do you control an adolescent who is going through a period that is more, a difficult period for some of them? Of course, not everyone will be scathed, will have problems because of that at the end. They overcome that, and some do, and some do, like the pathologic kids who do pathologic digital use. But I would have hoped at the time that the government would actually implement the law and not leave it just on parents to control their kids, because this is not easy. It's easy to say we raise the kids and we will do what we can. We can't always, because there is a social context that is pushing you in a certain direction. So balance, a balance in everything. I agree with Mark that the Chinese government really, I mean, this law, it's a law, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is extreme and it's very authoritarian, no question about that. Should there be some type of helpful guidance for the parents and support of the parents? Maybe yes. Where do you put the line? It's not easy.
And now, Mark, Froster has had a number of opportunities to respond to you. I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if you wanted to respond to her. Was there anything you wanted to rejoinder with?
No, I mean, the bottom line is that I think Frosso, myself, there are far more areas of agreement than disagreement. And in fact, when we disagree, it's actually more nuanced than that. Is that, I mean, if we take the time angle, I'm a great believer that, even though we know most addictive behaviors particularly behavioral addictions, there is a massive correlation between the amount of time that you spend gaming or on social media or gambling and addiction. What I don't like is when time is if you like, used as a predictor for these particular activities, because, you know, particularly when it comes to gaming and social media use, there are a lot of people out there that are what I would call excessive users. And let's just say I'll make up, you know, something out, pluck out the air, excessive use, anything over 5 hours a day on social media and video gaming. I can tell you now, I've got colleagues, and I certainly know, you know, people in my children's kind of social groups who do spend 5 or more hours a day in, you know, doing these things. But, you know, very few of them would be classed as addicted by the criteria that I define as being addicted. And that's why time, you know, a lot of people know in terms of my writing how I define addictive behavior, and time, the time that you spend doing something is not one of the core criteria for addiction. So for me, it's always about how this particular behavior, how it negatively impacts on other areas of your life. And, you know, people do go through times. I mean, you know, one of my most cited papers, and it's actually a paper that got rejected by a number of journals before it finally got accepted, but it's now actually one of my most highly cited papers, where I compared 2 case studies of 2 males who were spending up to 14 hours a day every day playing on video games. Now, you know, and the thing is, people, you know, one of the things I tried to argue in this paper is that one of these guys was quite clearly addicted to playing video games, fulfilled all of my own criteria for addiction, and in fact would probably fulfill anybody's criteria for what it is to be addicted. But I compared him, and this was a guy that basically got sacked from his job because of his gaming use. His wife left him, took away the kids, because he was spending all day playing a game called EverQuest. But I compared him actually with a 21-year-old guy who just left university. And this was somebody without children, without a partner, and had no job. And was basically, from the moment he got up to when he went to bed, he was playing World of Warcraft. Okay, now it's quite obvious that, you know, he was spending all his days, you know, day in, day out playing this game. But in all honesty, at that point in his life, there was really next to no negative impact, because, you know, he didn't have a partner, didn't have children, didn't have a job. This was his be all and end all. And in fact, you know, the gaming was something that he was lauded for, revered in the game. He had massive high self-esteem. He met his now wife in the game. He now works in the video game industry. I mean, video games were quite clearly the most important part of his life. And he was doing it very, very excessively. But by my criteria, yes, there were some potentially addictive elements there. But the fact that, you know, going back to my, you know, what's the difference between a healthy excessive enthusiasm and addiction, it was quite clear that his gaming was actually something that was positive in his life at that point, and actually got him through a very difficult period. But for me, that wouldn't class as an addiction. You know, and I say, I mean, Frosso mentioned, I mean, she was talking about the push factors. Okay, I mean, one of the things that, you know, I've been doing a lot of my research in terms of gambling and gaming is on the pull factors. You know, what is it about, you know, how do people design their video games or design their gambling products as a way to get you in? How are these things marketed and advertising? These are all pull factors, which are, you know, when we talk about how are we going to overcome the overuse or overindulgence of, you know, screen-based technologies, well, things like marketing and advertising and how games are actually designed, these are all really important things that from a policy perspective are very, very important to think about. You know, I mean, the vast majority of my work for the first 20 years of my career was very much about, very much about gambling, you know, and things like the gambling, advertising and marketing. It's a really hot issue here in the UK. I know it's been quite a hot issue in Australia as well, because I know lots of researchers who work in gambling and have been looking at all of that stuff. But, you know, when we talk about, you know, what is it that, you know, in terms of how people design their games, we have to realize is that the things that, if you like, make gaming and gambling and social media, you know, kind of potentially addictive is things like, you know, short-term reinforcing rewards. I mean, these are the very things that make gaming exciting, that make gambling exciting. We know, you know, I mean, I can tell you almost instantly which types of gambling product are more likely to have a higher association with problem gambling, just based on what we call the event frequency. So for instance, I've never, ever met anybody addicted to a bi-weekly lotto game. I mean, if you only receive the result of your gamble once on a Wednesday night and once on a Saturday night, it's quite clear that you're never going to become addicted to that, because the rewards and reinforcements are only twice a week. Whereas if on a slot machine, on a pokey in Australia, on a poker machine, because you can play 10 times a minute on a poker machine, it's those types of activity that tend to be more problematic, because you're bombarded with constant rewards. And of course, that happens on social media and on video games all the time. The rewards come thick and fast. The event frequencies are very, very high. Now, of course, if you reduce those event frequencies, then people will stop playing those games and stop interacting, because they just won't be fun and exciting. I mean, I could create you the safest poker machine in the world, and how I would do that is when you come to my club and you play on my poker machine, I'm only going to let you press the button or pull the lever once on a Wednesday night, once on a Saturday night, and I guarantee you will never become addicted to a pokey that you can only play twice a week. But of course, when you apply that to social media, or you apply that to gaming, it's very hard to take out all these exciting and rewarding and reinforcing things, the things that make something potentially addictive for people. So what you have to do is you have to put in a protective infrastructure. So that's why in gambling, when you go on an online gambling site now, you can set the amount of time that you want to spend on this activity and the amount of money that you want to spend. That could be exactly the same for gaming and social media use. You know, in the cold light of day, you say to yourself, I want my social media operator or my gaming provider, it's basically to, you know, when I go on this site, I'm going to tell them I don't want to spend more than 2 hours a day on this site. And once you've reached that 2 hours, then it just stops. And, you know, obviously you can always say, well, you can just go to the next site. But I mean, when it comes to things like social media sites, people don't necessarily use 10 different ones. They tend to go, I mean, my age, I mean, I use a lot of Facebook, you know, my kids are using WhatsApp and Instagram. People tend to use one or two types. And if you were restricting use, if the operators gave you a chance to restrict your use on that, that would be a good, you know, a good first step in trying to moderate use. So again, I mean, I haven't really come back at Frosso there, because, you know, I do think we actually agree on many, many things. It's just these, you know, the peripheral things around the edges that we must just have made just slightly different nuanced views about.
Perfect, perfect. Now, I'm sorry, guys, I am going to have to move us forward to topic 3, which is future directions. Kasim's going to take it away from here.
Thanks, Dion. You know, this discussion has been very engaging, especially in the context of push and pull factors. And I'd be really interested to know what you both think of level-based rewards in video games, as well as the loot box system, which is akin to somewhat gambling. But as Dion said, in the interest of time, we will have to move forward to topic 3. And I'll allocate 5 minutes to Professor Griffiths to respond and 5 minutes to Professor Motti. So our final question is, what are the sort of future directions within this field? And do you feel there are any limitations in the way these topics are researched? For example, do you think there are issues with transparency and with certain researchers being funded by large corporations in the field?
Sorry, who's that to first?
I'll go to Mark first, Dr.
Okay.
Professor Griffiths.
Again, so I'd like to think I've been one of the pioneers in the gambling field of using data that's actually provided by the gambling industry, and that's obviously a very controversial thing to start with, you know. And I get accused, you know, people say, oh, he works for the gambling industry. I mean, that's absolute rubbish. I'm an independent researcher, okay, and I've worked with 5 or 6 gambling companies who have given me access to their data. Now, the thing about this data, we're talking here about very high quality data. You know, if you look at, let's say you can take 4 or 5 of publications I've published over the last year, and my sample sizes are ranging between about 50,000 online gamblers to 175,000 online gamblers. What we've got here is very high quality data actually showing objectively what people are doing on these sites. Now, I've actually called for some of my papers more recently is that the technologies we're using to research online gambling should be applied to social media use and to gaming use. Now, I do know that companies like Facebook, they have started to open up their data to academic researchers. So there are some moves there in terms of using big data, using real, when I think about the fact that we're now using real gamblers in real time on real sites, that's also happening, I think, in some research that's done on social media platforms. But where that is completely lacking, is in the video gaming industry. I mean, for me, the video game industry have put their head in the sand. They've actually just said, you know, we don't believe the research that is out there saying that gaming is problematic. Okay, social media operators and gambling operators, they've both admitted that for a small minority, is that their consumptive activity to a small minority is something that takes up a huge amount of time and in some case a huge amount of money, and that people have problems. Now, of course, when it comes to gaming now, when we talk about video gaming, when I first started, is that gaming, we always talked about the loss of time. And of course, now with gaming, with things like loot boxes and microtransactions, is actually for people who game excessively, this has actually become monetized now and is actually coming more like gambling. And just for the record, I mean, I've got a couple of papers now I've written on loot boxes where I've actually argued that loot boxes actually are a legitimate form of gambling and should actually be regulated under gambling laws. But you know, the thing is that what I would love to have is data from the video game industry to have a look at what these loot box players are doing. You know, because all the stuff that's on loot boxes at the moment is obviously using self-report methods. It's asking gamers, you know, how are you using these? You know, and whether it's a focus group, an individual one-to-one qualitative interview, or whether it's surveys. Yeah, that's all well and good up to a point. And I've used those self-report methods many, many times. But of course, you know, now we're living in a world, and when we talk about screen-based digital technologies, we're talking about commercial operators who have just these mass swathes of data there now. And this, for me, is where research has to go. Now, I've been very fortunate in the you know, I'm one of the few people in the gambling studies field that have been given access to these huge, large data sets provided by gambling companies. You know, and I'm working with those gambling companies to try and identify these people that we believe are heavy, excessive, and in some case problematic users. And of course, those technologies, you know, the algorithms we're using now to try and identify these people, these are exactly the same things that we could be using if social media operators and the video gaming industry gave us access to. I mean, I don't want to say that, you know, this big data is the be all and end all in terms of where research is going. But one of the things that, you know, I mean, any of us that work, for instance, in the area of gaming will know that, you know, 90%, well, probably more than 90% of studies are basically cross-sectional survey studies. And Frosso said earlier, I mean, I know that she probably wants to come in on longitudinal research, so I won't steal her thunder there, but quite clearly, we need more longitudinal research to be done, because this is where we, you know, we can look at those kind of cause and effects. We can look at where these push and pull factors come in. Now, I'm not sure if I've used all my 5 minutes, but I'll go over to Frosso now.
Thank you so much, Professor Griffiths. Professor Motti?
So yeah, I think that we need to focus more on individual differences. It's not only how much, as Mark said, the digital media are used. It's not just the frequency, but it's also the differential susceptibility of people to digital media. This is a concept that we have developed in the paper in the European Psychologist, whereby we know that the same exposure in two different people may have a different effect on these people based on who they are and what they're bringing along with them into this situation. So I think that actually, I'm going back again to developing, to younger developing individuals, so children and adolescents more than adults, right? So I think that we need, as Mark said, and as I said earlier, longitudinal studies in order, and what will be the two key purposes: to further study how to define normative or moderate use that is good enough and doesn't hurt and actually promotes positive development of youth and of children. This is a very important part. There are studies in this direction, but I don't think that they suffice. Longitudinally, you would need to really follow kids from the beginning, before they even, like a cohort of kids, starting even before, you know, they actually are digital media users. Most of them will be, you know, more than 90% or 99% will use the digital media, and follow up and how well they're doing with respect to developmental tasks, their mental health, try to see how their families are functioning, their schools. So look in context their behavior and follow through over the years and see at some point how to define positive or moderate usage, which is good enough and doesn't hurt. And this will be shown later on longitudinally, where you can see that if you use X number of hours per day and the XYZ types of digital media, and whatever other factors are important, right, to take into account, this will lead to a positive adaptation. This will lead to young people who are waking up in the morning, they're going to work or to the university or to work, or they have relationships with people, they have positive affect, they don't have particular mental health problems. Nobody's completely normal, but at least, to be able to have a balanced internal life, let's say, and external. So longitudinal studies in studying digital media use in context, studying nested context. So you have at the first level, you basically have the role of the person themselves. You have the cyber context that we introduced in the paper in the European Psychologist. And then you have the proximal context, family, peers, schools, etc. And then, etc. There are more levels going up to the societal level. So the influence of each of those contexts on behavior is important. And they can make the difference alone, each one context, and in interaction with each other on who will use how the digital media, right? It is, as Mark pointed out in the beginning, it's complicated. It's not easy, but we need to focus more on individual differences. And I don't think that this type of study can be done with funding from the industry. I think this has to be done by independent funding agencies that don't have a stakes in this issue, right? So we do need to do this type of scientific work with independent type of money and funds.
Thank you so much for your answers, Professor Motti and Professor Griffiths. I'll now pass it on to Dr. Vas Stavropoulos.
And Professor Saplis, Jenny, So to summarize what we've discussed here tonight, we aim to address a series of questions, and I feel that for every question we managed to generate more questions, while aiming to address it. So for topic one, my sense is that both panelists agreed that the equation is way more complex, and that we have factors related to the user, related to the medium, and related to the context of the user that interact to produce different outcomes, moderate use or excessive use. Regarding topic two, which was what should we do to prevent or intervene on excessive digital media usage, the panelists highlighted, in my sense, in a kind of complementary way, different aspects. So Mark illustrated the responsibility of the providers, and he suggested that the providers themselves could include measures or means that raise awareness, and of course, in context, taking into consideration the user and the context, and Froster highlighted the importance of the government setting general framework and policies to help the parents and the teachers to balance usage. It seemed, that was my sense, that they disagreed about the exact amount of time during the day that should be considered pathological or not pathological. So according to Mark, for digital natives, 3 or 4 hours daily being online might not be compromising. According to Froster, taking it from a different context, that's how I heard things, that could be detrimental. Regarding policies and the future, Mark highlighted the responsibility and the opportunity that we have as research community to capitalize on existing data, which are gathered by the digital media providers themselves. And he illustrated how, the depth of information that we can get from this data. And Froster suggested that, yes, that was my sense, data is useful, but we need independent funding so that there is no conflict of interest. One thing is using the data from the companies, another thing completely different is using funding from them to address research questions. And I would suggest, I'm not sure what Jenny has to say here and what she thinks, but my thought would be that if the government at a state level introduced a framework that obliged the companies to provide their data to researchers without at the same time providing funding, that would be that could be a golden opportunity to move research forward. Frost also highlighted the importance of longitudinal contextualized studies, and my sense is that Mark agreed. Overall, I would like to thank you for attending this webinar, and I'm giving the word to Jenny to close us and wrap us up. She does it always in a gentle way.
Thank you very much, Vasilis. It's been a really interesting seminar, and thank you so much, everybody, for your participation, our expert panel members, and also our facilitators, and of course, Vasilis, for organising it in the beginning. I feel I've learned a lot, despite having raised a digital native myself, while looking on from the sidelines and trying to learn something about the process. In fact, my boys all had very different experiences, because this area is evolving so much, isn't it? And my younger nieces and nephews have a whole different type of world. So I think it's a really important topic, and one that parents need guidance on, but also that we really do need research on. And I've learned some interesting things today, like healthy excessive enthusiasms. I think I'll use that phrase in my life. And I think that the tools, really interesting comment, and of course the whole mental health aspect of the way in which engaging online can impact on development is a baby science, isn't it? I think that's what we're hearing, that people have gambled for a long time, but this whole world of living that we've all just had an immersion in for 2 years in this virtual manner is really very different than anything that we experienced before. So thank you, everybody, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to contribute to this very interesting webinar. Thank you, Vasily. I would like to thank also Quasim and Deon and Mark. It was really nice meeting you.
Yeah, you too, Frosso.